My name is Darren Mitchell. I'm 41 years old, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. 2 nights ago, my entire life shifted with the buzz of a single text message. My wife, Amber, decided she was done with our 13-year marriage. She told me, as casually as if she were ordering coffee, that she had found someone else, moved my belongings into a storage unit, and drained nearly $90,000 from our joint bank account. I sat there in my kitchen, the same one we had picked tile for together, wondering how something we built for over a decade could be tossed aside so easily. And as I stared at that message, something inside me clicked. Not rage, not sorrow, but an icy calm that told me it was time to act, not react. I never imagined that the woman who once danced barefoot with me on the 4th of July would be the same woman to send a breakup text like she was canceling brunch plans. The message was short: "I'm not coming back. I found someone who understands me. Your things are at public storage off Harding Place." Beneath it was a screenshot showing $89,400 funneled from our joint savings into a personal account I hadn't even known existed. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, as if it might detonate if I moved too fast, and leaned heavily against the kitchen island. No shouting, no pacing. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the heavy silence of a home that wasn't mine anymore. The signs had been there, plain as day, if I had been willing to look. Girls' weekends that morphed into full-week trips, new clothes with tags still attached, secretive phone calls that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. I was a cop, for God's sake, trained to notice when something didn't add up. But in my own home I had ignored the evidence. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the need to believe that one part of my life was still stable when the world outside wasn't. I pushed away from the counter and walked down the short hallway to my den, a room Amber had always called my man cave, with a condescending chuckle. In the bottom drawer of my desk, underneath stacks of old case files and police commendations, was a laptop she didn't know existed. I powered it up, my fingers steady, my mind sharper than it had been in months. I logged into an encrypted email account. One flashing notification greeted me. Unauthorized access attempt, joint savings account. So she wasn't just leaving. She was covering her tracks. That almost made me admire her. Almost. I pulled out an old prepaid flip phone, a relic from my time in undercover narcotics, and sent a message to the only person who knew my situation, Luke Rains. We had met on the force years ago, but while I stayed in uniform, Luke had jumped ship and gone private. Cybersecurity was his playground now. My message was simple. Plan Eagle. Activate. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Understood. Standing by. I let out a slow breath and started laying the groundwork. Over the last few years, I had watched Amber drift, and somewhere deep down, I had started preparing for the worst. I diverted parts of my salary into personal savings, bought gold bullion stored in private vaults, picked up shares in small but stable companies through trusts Amber couldn't trace. I even bought a tiny 2-bedroom rental house under an LLC name. She thought we owned a house together, had a joint savings account, and that was it. She never bothered asking about anything else. That ignorance was going to cost her. I glanced around the den. The walls still held our wedding photos, our vacation memories, the little milestones of a shared life. But the love those frames once held had faded long before this night. I thought about our first meeting, a charity auction for the Police Benevolence Fund. She had worn this bright red dress and smiled like she owned the room. She liked telling her friends she was married to Nashville's finest, and it sounded glamorous, even if the reality was late nights, canceled dinners, and secondhand smoke from crime scenes. By 6 the next morning, I was at the local branch of the First National Bank. Claire Bennett, the manager, recognized me instantly. A few years back, I had recovered her stolen purse after a mugging. Claire didn't ask questions. I presented my documents, showed her the fraudulent transaction, and within an hour, all joint accounts were frozen, Amber's new account flagged, and a fraud investigation launched. I signed the final form and walked outside into the crisp Tennessee morning, the rising sun burning off the last traces of darkness. I drove straight to Luke's place. It was a modest ranch on the edge of Franklin, cluttered with tech gadgets and 3 lazy golden retrievers. We sat side by side, laptops open, digging into Amber's digital footprint. In less than an hour, we found the jackpot. her new boyfriend plastered across her Instagram. His name was Tanner Blake, owner of a downtown honky-tonk called the Copper Spur. Tattoos, backward baseball cap, leather wristbands. He looked like every cliché Nashville had ever produced. A few clicks later, Luke had Tanner's financial records spread across 3 screens. The Copper Spur was bleeding money. Tanner was buried under lawsuits, default notices, and unpaid liquor distributors. And in a brilliant move of sheer stupidity, Amber had signed on as a co-owner just 2 months earlier. Not just signed on, she had invested money. Our money. I leaned back in Luke's battered leather office chair, staring at the train wreck of Tanner Blake's financials. Amber hadn't just left me. She had tied herself to a sinking ship, and she thought she was sailing into the sunset. She had no idea the iceberg was already dead ahead. I spent the better part of that morning mapping out my next moves. Luke printed off everything he found. Property deeds, bank statements, pending lawsuits, credit applications, all connected to Tanner Blake and his crumbling empire. It was almost comical how reckless they both had been. Tanner had recently secured a $120,000 loan to expand operations at the Copper Spur, with Amber listed as a co-signer. She probably thought she was investing in their bright future together, but all she really did was strap herself to a man sinking faster than a cinder block in the Cumberland River. I knew the law better than most. As her husband, she couldn't legally leverage our marital assets without my consent, and certainly not to fund some failing bar venture. Every loan she co-signed while married to me, especially using joint collateral, would collapse the second our divorce papers were filed. All I had to do was initiate the right chain of events, and the financial institutions would do the heavy lifting for me. Tanner would find out soon enough that betting on someone else's wife doesn't guarantee you a winning hand. I left Luke's house with a folder thick enough to slap down on any lawyer's desk. On the way to my attorney's office, I allowed myself one quick stop. The Copper Spur. I parked across the street and watched for a few minutes. Even from my truck, I could hear the strained twang of a second-rate cover band hammering through a Shania Twain song. Half the neon letters on the sign were flickering or completely dead. Tourists stumbled in and out, clutching souvenir cups and shouting over the music. It wasn't hard to see why Tanner was desperate for cash. This place was a sinking ship, and Amber had thrown our life raft right onto it. Back at the office, my attorney, Rachel Myers, raised an eyebrow when she saw the thick stack of documents I dropped on her desk. She was tough, sharp, and not afraid to play hardball, which was exactly why I hired her. She flipped through the papers methodically, nodding occasionally. "You have enough here to file for divorce under grounds of marital financial misconduct and fraud," she said finally, her tone dry but impressed. "We can move for emergency asset protection immediately. That'll freeze everything until the court sorts it out." "Good," I said, the word tasting like steel on my tongue. "I want her out of my financial life yesterday." Rachel smiled grimly. "After this, she'll wish she never even heard of the word co-signer." As she drafted the initial filings, I made another quiet move. Using a private investigator contact from my old days working narcotics, I ordered a background sweep not just on Tanner, but on Amber's recent activities. I wanted every receipt, every paper trail, every questionable decision she thought was hidden behind Instagram filters and late-night promises. By sunset, the papers were filed. Amber would be served by the end of the next day, and the banks would receive notice to freeze and review any accounts tied to us jointly. The moment the divorce filing hit, every one of her co-signed loans would become vulnerable to immediate call-ins. Tanner's house of cards wasn't just shaky anymore. It was already falling. That night, sitting alone in my truck outside of a cheap diner off Nolensville Pike, I watched the city lights twinkle in the distance. Nashville always buzzed with energy. Tourists, hopeful musicians, late-night dreamers. It was a city built on ambition, and sometimes on heartbreak. I sipped my lukewarm coffee and thought about all the small choices that had led me here. The ignored conversations, the excuses I accepted. The times I told myself things would get better if I just worked harder, stayed longer, bent a little more. Amber didn't break me. She revealed me. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't a passenger in my own life anymore. The next morning, the storm hit fast. My phone lit up with a string of frantic calls from Amber's number. I let them go to voicemail. Texts followed, first demanding, then pleading, then enraged. I read each one without emotion. She hadn't called to apologize. She hadn't even called because she missed me. She called because her fantasy life was crumbling faster than she could scramble to patch it. Around noon, Rachel called me. Amber's been served, and her boyfriend just found out his line of credit has been frozen. I expect it won't be long before he comes knocking. Sure enough, by mid-afternoon, Tanner himself showed up at the precinct. He wasn't hard to spot, a leather jacket in June and a desperate look in his eyes. I stayed in the back, out of sight, as he tried and failed to sweet-talk one of the desk sergeants into letting him speak to me. Regulations protected me. Personal matters weren't handled on duty, and certainly not through walk-ins. Tanner eventually stormed out, kicking the automatic door on his way, drawing the kind of attention no man begging for mercy should want. Later that evening, after a slow patrol shift, I returned to my truck to find a handwritten note wedged under the windshield wiper. It was hastily scrawled and desperate. "We can fix this. Call me, please." No signature, but I didn't need one. It reeked of panic. I drove past the Copper Spur again that night. The parking lot was half empty. Tanner stood outside smoking, pacing in circles like a man trying to figure out where he lost control. I watched from the shadows, engine idling. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't celebrating. I was simply witnessing the inevitable collapse of people who had built their future on betrayal and borrowed money. And deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come for them. The real consequences hadn't even started. The next morning brought the real fireworks. I was eating a dry sausage biscuit from the gas station when my phone vibrated again. This time a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, curiosity got the better of me. I answered with a simple, "Mitchell." The voice on the other end was thick with desperation. "Darren, please, it's Amber. I know you're angry, but we can fix this. I made mistakes, but we can work through them." Her words tumbled out in a rush, frantic and cracked around the edges. She sounded nothing like the confident woman who had strutted out of my life so easily 2 days ago. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her squirm. "I don't think you understand, Amber. This isn't about anger. It's about consequences." There was a beat of silence, and then her voice sharpened. "You're trying to ruin me. You're ruining Tanner's business. They're threatening to repossess the bar equipment and seize the building. You have to stop this." I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, trying to find the right manipulation. Once upon a time, it might have worked. Not today. I kept my voice steady, professional. "You did that yourself when you took marital assets and gambled them on a bankrupt bar without my knowledge. I'm just making sure the law catches up with you." She cried then. Real or fake, it didn't matter anymore. I ended the call without another word and blocked the number. I didn't feel a flicker of guilt. If anything, I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying a dead weight for years and had finally set it down. By lunchtime, Rachel called with more updates. The bank completed the review. They've frozen all jointly tied credit lines. The bar's accounts are in default. They're starting foreclosure proceedings on Tanner's business property. I whistled low. Faster than I expected. "Turns out, once one lender gets nervous, the others follow like sheep," she said with a chuckle. "Tanner's about to learn what a house of cards feels like when someone pulls out the bottom." That evening, Luke and I met up at a quiet little dive bar on the outskirts of town. Not the flashy kind Tanner ran, but the kind with regulars who didn't care if you wore cowboy boots or steel-toed work shoes. We sat at a corner table nursing beers, both of us content to watch the night roll by in comfortable silence. "You know," Luke said finally, tipping his bottle toward me, "you could have gone nuclear. Could have pressed theft charges, dragged her through criminal court, wrecked her whole life." I shrugged. "What's the point? She's already doing it to herself. I don't need revenge. I need peace." Luke grinned. "Well, you sure as hell got that. I almost feel sorry for Tanner." "Almost," I agreed, clinking my bottle against his. Around midnight, as I was driving home, my phone buzzed again. A new message, this time from another unknown number. It simply read, "You'll regret this. We're not giving up." No signature, no context needed. Tanner. Of course, he was the type to make threats when charm failed. I smirked and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Let him rage. Let him scream. The legal wheels were already in motion, grinding slow but unstoppable. The next day was court day. Mediation had been scheduled weeks ago as part of the divorce proceedings, but now it had taken on a whole new weight. I showed up early, in a pressed shirt and tie, looking every bit the calm, reasonable party. Rachel met me at the courthouse steps, a thick binder in her arms. "Ready?" she asked. "Been ready for months," I said, and meant it. Amber arrived 10 minutes late, sunglasses hiding her eyes, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first patrol car. But she couldn't hide the tension, the tightness around her mouth, the white-knuckled grip on her purse. Tanner wasn't with her. Coward. Inside the mediation room, her attorney, a slick-talking guy who looked like he spent more time on tanning beds than in law libraries, tried to take the offensive. He accused me of financial abuse, withholding funds, manipulating accounts. I let him rant for a full 5 minutes, arms crossed, face impassive. Then Rachel calmly slid a folder across the table. "We have documented evidence showing that Mrs. Mitchell transferred funds without authorization, co-signed business loans without spousal consent, and misused marital assets to fund private ventures." Amber's lawyer blanched. Amber herself just stared at the table, mouth pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Rachel wasn't finished. "We also have notarized copies of the loan applications where Mr. Mitchell's signature was forged to secure better credit terms." The silence was deafening. "We can settle today," Rachel said smoothly, "or we can proceed with criminal charges. The district attorney's office has already been notified pending the outcome of this mediation." I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. For 13 years, Amber had counted on my silence, my willingness to forgive, my need to keep the peace. She had no idea what it felt like when the man she underestimated finally decided to stand his ground. After a long, agonizing pause, Amber's lawyer nodded stiffly. "We'll sign." And just like that, the game was over. The documents were signed without further theatrics. Amber kept her car, the personal items she had packed away without a word, and the debt she had so foolishly tied herself to. She forfeited any claim to my pensions, savings, or future assets. Most importantly, she walked away carrying the full responsibility for every loan, every line of credit, and every co-signed agreement she had made with Tanner Blake. Watching her hand tremble as she signed the settlement was like seeing the final thread of our old life snap. Clean, irreversible. As soon as the signatures dried, Rachel handed the finalized paperwork to the court clerk. It was done. No more discussions, no more desperate voicemails or pitiful apologies. Amber and I were no longer husband and wife. We were two strangers connected only by memories that I now chose to leave in the past. Outside the courthouse, Nashville was alive with late afternoon traffic, the streets humming with energy. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting the noise and life wash over me. Amber brushed past me without a word, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete, disappearing into a waiting rideshare. She didn't even look back. Good, I thought. Neither would I. That evening I sat on the small back porch of the rental house I had bought under the trust name. It wasn't much, a fixer-upper with a cracked driveway and a stubborn front door, but it was mine. I cracked open a cold beer and watched the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors. For the first time in years I felt free. No invisible chains pulling at my ankles, no eggshells to tiptoe across, no weight of someone else's constant dissatisfaction pressing against my chest. Luke stopped by just as the stars started to emerge, carrying a pizza and that sly grin he always wore when things went our way. "Well, Officer Mitchell," he said, plopping the greasy box down on the patio table. "Looks like you're officially a free man." I raised my bottle in a mock toast. "To freedom, and to idiots who think love means free money." Luke laughed. And for a little while, we ate and talked like we used to before life got so damn complicated. Later, after Luke left and the neighborhood settled into that peaceful, sleepy rhythm, I pulled up the local news app on my phone. There it was, buried in the business section. The copper spur facing foreclosure amid financial scandal. No names were mentioned yet, but it was only a matter of time before the full story leaked. About the debts, the lawsuits, the fraud investigations. Tanner Blake's empire was crumbling fast, and he had dragged Amber down with him. A small part of me wondered if she regretted it. Not just the betrayal, but the stupidity of thinking that chasing excitement and superficial glamour would lead her anywhere worth going. But mostly, I didn't care. Her journey was her own now. Mine was finally beginning anew. The next few weeks passed in a strange kind of serenity. I took some time off work, fixed the squeaky hinges on the old house, repaired the rotting porch railings with my own 2 hands. It felt good, grounding even. Physical work didn't lie. If you did it right, things stayed fixed. Simple as that. Every now and then, I would get a message from mutual friends, whispers of Amber trying to spin the story in her favor. She painted herself as the victim, claiming I had blindsided her, that she had been trapped in an unhappy marriage, that I'd been controlling, withholding. I didn't bother defending myself. Truth doesn't need to shout to be real. Let her talk. Let her spin her webs. I had no intention of getting tangled in them ever again. As for Tanner, he vanished almost overnight. Word was he had packed up and moved to Atlanta, trying to restart his brand in a bigger market. Good luck with that. Nashville might forgive a lot, but bad business and dirty money weren't easily forgotten. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old box of stuff Amber had shoved into storage, I found an old photo album tucked between some winter coats. It was filled with pictures of the early days, backyard barbecues, cheap vacations, birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes and dollar store decorations. We looked young, stupid, and so damn hopeful. I stared at one picture for a long time. The 2 of us grinning at the camera, arms around each other, oblivious to the future, waiting for us. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel regret. I just felt distance, like I was looking at strangers who had once shared a dream that neither of them understood how to maintain. I closed the album and packed it away without ceremony. The past belonged in the past. That night, sitting on the porch with a glass of bourbon in my hand and the cicadas singing in the distance, I realized something important. Amber hadn't destroyed me. She had freed me from a life that was slowly suffocating me. And I had freed myself from the biggest lie of all, that love was supposed to mean losing yourself to keep someone else happy. No more. Tomorrow was a new day, and for the first time in years, it was truly mine. A few weeks after the settlement was finalized, life began to take on a quieter, simpler rhythm. I returned to work, but not with the same heavy weight I used to carry. There was a clarity now, a sense that everything unnecessary had been burned away. My job was still the same. Long hours, tough cases, endless paperwork. But inside, I was different. The bitterness had drained out of me. There was only focus now. Purpose. I transferred out of my old patrol unit and accepted a new role teaching defensive tactics at the academy downtown. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but the chief had suggested it after hearing about everything that had happened. Might do you good to build something new, he said. And he was right. Helping the next generation of officers, shaping their mindset, their discipline. It gave me a sense of accomplishment that chasing down petty criminals never could. The new house, small and stubborn as it was, started to feel like home. I ripped out the worn carpet myself, laid new hardwood floors, painted the walls with my own hands. Every scratch, every blister was a reminder that this place was built honestly. No lies, no masks, just sweat, time, and patience. One Saturday afternoon, while installing new shelves in the garage, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Instinct told me to ignore it, but something made me answer. Darren? It was Amber. I froze for a moment, then leaned against the workbench, wiping the dust from my hands. What do you want? Her voice was small, nothing like the fire and bravado she used to throw around so easily. I wanted to apologize. Not because I expect anything from you. I know I don't deserve it. She trailed off. I waited, giving her nothing. I lost everything, she said finally. Tanner's gone. The bar's gone. The debt's crushing me. I don't know what to do anymore. For a brief second, a flicker of the old Darren, the one who had always stepped in, always fixed things, rose up. But it passed just as quickly. She had made her choices. She had walked willingly into the fire, thinking she was chasing something better. I wasn't responsible for putting out the flames she had lit herself. I hope you find your way, Amber, I said simply. But that's not my problem anymore. I ended the call and blocked the number without hesitation. There was no satisfaction, no triumph, just peace. She had chosen her path. I had chosen mine. 2 people moving in opposite directions, finally free of the illusion that they were ever meant to walk side by side. That night I sat out on the back porch again, a cool breeze rustling the trees overhead. I thought about all the plans Amber and I had once made, the vacations we never took, the dreams we never built, the promises that had faded into excuses and blame. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was grateful. Grateful that life had stripped away the false promises and left me standing on solid ground. Grateful for the lessons learned, painful as they were. Grateful to know that real strength isn't about holding on when everything's broken. It's about letting go when you finally see the truth. The next morning, I packed a small bag, loaded my fishing gear into the back of my truck, and headed out toward Center Hill Lake. No plans, no timelines, just water, sky, and a chance to breathe. Driving with the windows down, country music humming low from the radio, I felt lighter than I had in years. There was no one waiting for me at home, no one demanding explanations or apologies. There was only the open road, the promise of a sunrise over still waters, and the simple, stubborn fact that I had survived. I smiled to myself, the first real easy smile I could remember in a long time. Freedom didn't come wrapped in revenge or vindication. It came quietly, on the wings of acceptance. And this time, I intended to hold on to it with both hands. Center Hill Lake was quiet when I arrived. The morning sun bounced off the water in dazzling streaks, and the air smelled clean, untouched. I found a small dock tucked away from the main marina, dropped my gear, and sat at the edge with my legs dangling over the side, rod in hand but not really caring if I caught anything. It wasn't about the fish. It was about the stillness, the silence, the room to breathe. I thought about how much time I had spent trying to be everything for someone who had already decided I was never enough. How many late nights I spent working overtime to pay for trips I wasn't even invited on. How many weekends I had spent alone while Amber was finding herself with her new friends and their promises of a bigger, better life. And through it all, I had clung to the hope that if I just worked harder, stayed patient longer, it would somehow fix itself. But that's not how life works. You can't fix people who don't want to be fixed. You can't pour yourself into someone else's empty well forever and expect it to start filling up. At some point, you have to realize that saving yourself is the only real act of love you have left. I reeled the line back in slowly, casting again without any real purpose, just letting the rhythm of it settle my mind. The problems of the past few months, the betrayal, the financial mess, the legal battles, they all seem so distant here, like shadows fading at the edges of a bright new day. Somewhere deep down, I realized that Amber's leaving wasn't a loss. It was an opportunity, an ugly, painful, brutal opportunity to rebuild a life that was mine alone. No pretenses, no lies, just honesty, hard work, and a little faith that good things could grow again if you cleared out the rot. Around noon, I packed up my gear and drove to a small diner just off the highway. I sat at the counter, ordered a greasy cheeseburger and a coffee, and struck up a conversation with the waitress, a woman named Marla, who had a laugh like a shotgun blast and a kindness in her eyes that was rare these days. We talked about fishing, bad country songs, and how life had a way of kicking you down only so you could find out how tough you really were. It wasn't flirting. It wasn't anything more than two strangers sharing a little piece of humanity over a meal. But it reminded me that the world was still full of decent people, small moments, and unexpected kindnesses that made all the difference. Driving home later that evening, windows down, radio low, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was healing. The old house welcomed me like an old friend. No polished marble countertops, no stainless steel appliances, just a creaky screen door and hardwood floors that still smelled faintly of sawdust and sweat. A home built not on appearances, but on effort, on truth. That night, sitting once more on the back porch with a fresh cup of coffee and the stars blinking awake overhead, I thought about the future, about the fishing trips I would take, about the quiet mornings fixing up the house, about maybe someday meeting someone new, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to share what I had built with someone who respected it. I thought about my father's old advice too, words he had given me long before Amber ever entered my life. Son, don't ever mistake love for sacrifice. The right person will never ask you to bleed just to prove you care. I hadn't understood it then. I understood it now. The only thing I regretted was how long it had taken me to learn it. But the good news? There was still plenty of life left to live. And for the first time in what felt like forever, it was mine. All mine. Life has a funny way of bringing you full circle. A few months after Amber vanished from my life, I found myself walking into a community fair down by Shelby Park. Nothing fancy. Food trucks, live bluegrass music, kids chasing each other with sticky hands and half-melted snow cones. It was real, honest, no pretense. I didn't plan to stay long. I figured I'd grab a pulled pork sandwich, maybe listen to a few songs, then head home. But as I stood there watching an old man with a weathered guitar sing about lost loves and second chances, I realized something important. This was life, not the Instagram perfect snapshots Amber had been chasing, not the empty promises Tanner had whispered in her ear. Real life. Imperfect, messy, beautiful in its own stubborn way. I stayed for hours, and as the sun dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in gold and fire, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Not really. The world hadn't ended when Amber left. It had opened up. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trapped in the wreckage of someone else's dreams. I was building my own. And brick by brick, day by day, I was learning that strength isn't about winning every battle. It's about knowing which battles are worth fighting at all. If you connected with my story, if it made you think about your own journey, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel. This community isn't just about listening to stories. It's about sharing experiences, lifting each other up, and remembering that no matter how hard life hits, you can always rebuild stronger than before. Tell us your story in the comments. Have you been through something similar? What lesson stuck with you the most from today's story? I'm genuinely excited to hear from you, and so is everyone else in our growing family here. Your voice matters. Your story could be the one that helps someone else find their way out of a tough spot. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like to help more people find it. Who knows, maybe today, someone needs exactly this kind of reminder. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of something real. And remember, no matter where you're starting from, your best chapter might be the next one you write. See you in the next story.